Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today is going to be a super fun podcast, very different from what we have done in the past. And today I am joined by an attorney at Modern Law, Darin Colburn. Thank you for joining us, Darin.
My pleasure.
And today we are going to nosh on the Dr. Dre Nicole Young divorce. It's public, it's messy, and there's a ton of legal issues for us to discuss. So you're going to get our legal analysis of the raunchy facts that are coming out about the Dre Young divorce.
Yep. And in case you are attorneys for either Miss Young or Mr. Dre, this is all speculative. We have no, we're just going off of what we read on the internet, so don't sue us.
The other thing we should mention is they're getting divorced in California. We're in Arizona, so we're not California attorneys, but California is a community property state. Arizona is a community property state, and largely what we're talking about is how would the facts in their case, how might they play out in California, and how might they play out in Arizona. So this is just simply for entertainment, not legal advice.
Right. Everything's alleged.
Everything's alleged. So, Darin, what is the background information on Nicole and Dre?
So, Dr. Dre, not a medical doctor, in case you didn't know, although I'm pretty sure he does have a medical card.
They don't need that in California.
California, you don't need one anymore. Also, Arizona as well. So, l'chaim to those of you out there who imbibe. They've been married for 24 years. They recently, she filed for divorce in June of 2020, citing irreconcilable differences. I always see this whenever any celebrity is getting divorced, like they make a point in the article or in the headline to say, they're getting divorced for irreconcilable differences, like that means anything.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah, I know.
You're totally right. Like you're right. All of the articles seem to really highlight the term irreconcilable differences. Now explain like why that means nothing.
Yeah, so like in Arizona, we don't have an irreconcilable difference standard. What we have is an irretrievably broken standard, and it's literally in the statute for divorce that if you'd like to get a divorce in Arizona, and you don't have what's called a covenant marriage, I won't go into that because we don't want to get into the weeds. But if you want to get a divorce, you have to say that your marriage is irretrievably broken. So I'm assuming it's the same in California, where if you want a divorce in California, you got to tell the judge in the court that you have irreconcilable differences. All that means is that one of you wants a divorce, right? It doesn't really mean anything beyond that.
Absolutely. So this came out of the no fault movement. So it used to be that in order to get a divorce, you had to allege a fault. And the fault might be adultery, it might be abuse, it might be abandonment. And then when the states got rid of the requirement that you allege fault, now all you have to allege is irreconcilable differences.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that was the genesis of it, but it kind of makes sense because in family court we tend to have hearings over everything. As you'll see, Dr. Dre and Miss Young are having lots of hearings so far and are going to fight over a lot of issues. But you wouldn't see in family court an evidentiary hearing on whether or not there is in fact irreconcilable differences or marriage is irretrievably broken. The court's just going to take your word for it, right? And that's interesting. So they got married after 4 months. She, and this will come into play, she was an attorney. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if she's still licensed to practice. Probably not. Let's be honest. If I were married to Dr. Dre, I probably wouldn't be practicing law.
Wouldn't be paying those bar dues.
Yeah, yeah. But you never know. She could be, but that's part of her past and part of her credentials. And she was also married to an NBA player for somebody. I'm going to be honest, and I'm sorry if they're good. Not somebody I've ever heard of. Not that I think is important because it's not. They've led a very public life and. Not her first rodeo with celebrity, right? Dr. Dre is one of the biggest celebrities around town in And he's really transcended. One thing I think is interesting to say, obviously, I'm sure all of you know about the Chronic, about Snoop Dogg. Um, he was a co-founder of what was it? Shoot, was it? Man, I need to get up to speed, but I think it was Def Jam Records. Um,
We're gonna have to do some editing, Darin.
yeah.
That's okay.
What?
So Dr.
Well,
Dre produced Eminem, 50 Cent, Tupac. He's one of the founders of hip hop, and then went on to be a businessman and an entrepreneur, made his own record label, and then of course there's Beats.
Beats by Dre, which my wife has. I just bought her a set for Christmas, so thank you. Oh, I guess I should have disclosed that at the beginning. I do own a pair of Beats, and they are very great, and I think I can remain unbiased. So it could be, take that. I'm not a shill for Dr. Dre, but yeah, he, and Apple bought Beats in 2014 for I think $3 billion or $4 billion or something like that, and he owned a 20% stake. So the man, according to Forbes in 2019, was worth over $800 million. So he's almost over that billion mark. Lots of assets, lots of net worth. Which means there's a lot there. I mean, depends on how you look at it. Some people are going to say there's a lot to fight over. Other people are going to say, well, we ought to be able to get a deal done, and we can have that conversation around the Jeff Bezos situation as well. But yeah, she filed for divorce in June. In January, he was hospitalized, and was on bed rest for a while due to a brain aneurysm. That's something that's kind of interesting. And the heat is really coming into play since she's filed. And Billy, you can talk about some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So she filed for divorce. They don't have minor children. So I think Dre has 8 children, and 2 with Nicole. As Darin said, this is Nicole's second marriage. Dr. Dre is on his first marriage. So this is his first divorce. The first major issue that came up was the prenuptial agreement. Was there a prenup, and what did it say? So when Nicole filed, she
Well, hold
asked.
on real quick. For those of you at home, I didn't know this until like 5 minutes ago. So I'm going to give you my raw reaction to whatever is in this prenup and the circumstances around it.
Okay, sounds good. So, when she originally filed, she asked for spousal maintenance of $2 million a month.
Ooh.
$2 million a month plus division of property. Now, Dre came forward and said, "What? We have a prenup." And she said, "No, we don't have a prenup. I was number one, I was forced to sign the prenup, even though I saw a lawyer beforehand, and even though I'm an attorney myself. And number two, he ripped that thing up as a show of love for me. And so it is null and void." These are the words that are coming out of the paperwork filed by Nicole. And before we analyze that, can we talk for a little bit about how much information is coming out of this divorce and what they could have done to make it a little bit more private?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's been shocking to me because if I had $800 million, I would be doing everything I can to get this resolved privately because um, they both have the resources to hire great mediators, great attorneys, great experts, whatever they need to get everything resolved. And if all of the talent that they could afford to purchase can't get this done privately and fairly, that would really surprise me. So I get the sense that there's a lot of emotion behind everything. And honestly, I'm not from California, but I'm always a little skeptical if you know because of things like the Kardashians, if maybe they're playing it up a little bit for publicity purposes. I don't know if that's going on here. That's complete speculation, but it is surprising to me that it's so public.
There
Because
are a couple
it doesn't.
things you can do to keep it private. Number
Yeah.
one, a lawyer can file to have the record sealed.
Mhm.
And I feel like, I don't know how hard that is to do in California, but here we could file to have the record sealed and it would undoubtedly be sealed, because what's happening is TMZ and Page Six is getting a hold of every single thing that is filed by either party and then writing about it. And then the second thing you can do is and that's what you can do if you as a couple can't agree on anything, which is what's going on with these two. But the other thing you can do is the two of you can agree to keep it private, which is what you were talking about. And then
Yeah.
you either take it to mediators or you take it to arbitrators. And if you can agree on nothing else, agree on the fact that you want to keep your private life private, but they have not done that. So we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
So she claimed that the prenup was null and void, ripped up, doesn't count. He filed it. And,
Okay.
and the prenup says that they are keeping their property separate. This is important because when you get married in a community property state like Arizona or like California, you are opting into the community property laws. So whether you get a prenup or you don't get a prenup, you are opting into some construct on the event that you get divorced. Now, Darin, take a second and just kind of explain the difference between everybody keeps their own and opting into community property.
Well, community property generally, and again, we don't practice in California, but I'm assuming it's the same. Um, there's a presumption. So the general rule would be that anything acquired or incurred during the marriage is community property, subject to technically an equitable division, but in practice that means an equal division. So, if something, the question becomes, when was something acquired? And if it was during the marriage, it's presumed to be community property, and you each get half. Now, there's lots of different ways to slice the pie, so to speak, but that would be the general analysis. Exceptions to that would be like inheritance, or if you're purchasing something during the marriage with funds that you had prior to the marriage, which would certainly be relevant here because Dr. Dre had some degree of fame and wealth before he got married, so he would have had the resources to purchase property. There's also, there's fights in this case about trademarks and that kind of stuff. So some of it's going to be premarital, some of it's going to be marital. That's kind of the question. The things that are marital that belong to the community, those get cut in half. The things that are separate gets a little more complicated. So if it's separate, Dre and his attorneys are going to say, "I want 100% of it. It's mine. You get no claim." There's probably a more nuanced claim on her attorney's side where they can say, okay, that's your property, but it grew in value during the marriage in part because of your labor, right? And he's spending those beats, right? And in California, I'm sure as in Arizona, labor actually going to work, working, participating, that is considered community property. So, the question becomes: is the growth related to um, his passive activities, or has he been actively managing these things during the marriage, and that is attributable to the increase? So, whereas if you have a prenup that just says we're keeping everything separate, period, then none of this matters, and that she's going to be out of a whole lot of money.
And that's what the judge has said. The
Yeah,
judge has said, we're going to accept this prenup as valid and you're still eligible for spousal maintenance. Now, I don't know. They own, I think, 4 pieces of property. And I don't know how those are titled, and how those are
right,
titled are going to impact whether or not that's property that's divisible or not. And that's the case for all of the property. Just because you have a prenup that says we're going to keep our property separate, that's fine and well and dandy. But if you start co-titling property, owning property together, then of course we still have something to fight about. So a prenup is not like, it's not like there's nothing to discuss after you have the prenup. There's still a lot to
right.
look at.
Right. And I encourage everyone out there, if you're having any major transactions early on in a marriage, or even, maybe later in the marriage that involve things that you owned prior, prior to the marriage, like for example, before you cash out your 401k to put on a down payment for your new house with your new wife, consult an attorney then rather than 15 years later when you're going through divorce, because you're allowed to make stupid decisions during the marriage when everything's good and dandy and it's all peace and love. And then I can't tell you how many people take a house that they own prior to the marriage, right? Their spouse has a no or minimal claim to it, and then they put their spouse on the title. They just gave her a claim to half. And almost always, not always, but almost always, people regret that when they're going through divorce. And people really should see a divorce attorney before they get married. unless you're starting with absolutely nothing, and you're not interested in the prenup. But
Yeah,
um,
I totally agree with you. And also, I think that this is something that you should be talking with your estate planning attorney about as
mhm,
well. Like, if you are somebody of high wealth, then you're probably buying houses in trusts anyway. And
right,
how those are titled and how you set these up will impact ownership, even if you have a prenup.
right,
So the
right.
business of your marriage can be a big deal. It's probably the biggest business partner you've ever had and that you will ever have. And they've been married for 24 years. So a lot has happened in 24 years. They probably built a lot together. So a prenup is something that you should sort of like revisit early and often, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing about a marriage of long duration is, for 24 years, if you really had to go back to all the banks and get all the documentation to prove all the transactions, and there's been quite a high volume of transactions, these institutions may not even have the records anymore,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Most banks keep records for 7 years now. I'm sure Dre's got a team that keeps these things, but it is another challenge. You see that a lot with retirement accounts, and you really want to be proactively managing and paying attention to these things during the marriage rather than just at the end of it and trying to work backwards.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, one other issue that's coming up is Nicole is alleging that Dr. Dre has had many, many mistresses, and she is looking to contact them and depose them. What are your thoughts on that?
All right. So here's the thing. First of all, I'm a married man. I don't personally believe in adultery. So I'm not co-signing anything. And like I said, everything is speculative here. But I would be surprised if she didn't know about it. And if I'm his attorney, that makes a difference to me. Because it's one thing if you're, first of all, I think California is also a no fault divorce state like Arizona. What that means, like Billie said, is, we don't have to prove adultery. Usually it also means that marital misconduct, and adultery would fall under that category, doesn't have an impact on property division, generally speaking. The exception to that would be like if it actually has a direct tie to finances, as in you took $100,000 from a joint account and you gave it to your mistress. That is community funds that you now have taken out of the community, and she would have a claim for reimbursement of half or more potentially, right? So it becomes a financial question. Um, Essentially, that's really what matters. But these things are always emotional. Um, I would say, but again, if she knew he had mistresses and that was to each their own, celebrities are kind of in their own little echelon of how they do things, right? If she knew he had side pieces, I think is what the colloquial term, um, then she's not going to prevail on a claim for waste, if she knows that he has this pattern of behavior. Now, if he's doing this without her knowledge, or maybe she knows that he has affairs, but she doesn't know that he's buying his side pieces, Bugattis and all this kind of stuff. That would also give rise to a potential claim. But again, to me, it kind of feels like the low hanging fruit, because this is a man who is worth almost $1 billion. So why are we going to fight over, half a million here when we could go after like 400 million over here? That's kind of how I feel about it.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. You've got an attorney who I feel like should know the prenuptial agreement is going to be enforceable. You're an
Right.
attorney. You signed it with the advice of an attorney. You know
Mhm.
that like that means you're bound by it. You've been divorced before. So, but one of the other things she asked for was $5 million
Yeah.
for attorney's fees.
Yeah.
And so,
I do.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I often tell clients that there's no end to what you could spend, but I don't. I think I would be hard pressed to spend $5 million. Although I've never worked with a client who's worth $1 billion, so that may be um, different. But that just kind of makes me cringe, because again, I don't understand within that $5 million that she wants to litigate this matter. you could put that towards getting the right, if she's getting good advice and not just kind of fanning the flame of conflict, which always happens in divorce. You could put those resources to getting a good outcome and to being strategically cost effective. I think I get the sense that they are to some degree fighting because they can, and they're fortunate to have the resources to fight. So, if I'm talking to a client who has $2,000 in the bank, and she had, her husband has an airtight prenup based on the facts after we do an analysis, I may say, yeah, we could try to challenge it, but it's just going to be a waste of your money. But if I'm talking to her and she has millions of dollars to spend, it might, hey, we can try to challenge it. It's a very uphill battle, but the cost benefit analysis is potentially different there, right?
I totally agree with you. So challenging the prenup from a legal perspective makes perfect sense. If he's got $1 billion that you potentially get a claim to or don't get a claim to, you got to challenge the prenup. You have to fight it with everything you can. But if you find out that the prenup is then valid, which the judge has said it is,
Yes.
and now you're chasing down lovers, this is where this seems to me to be a legal move that I don't quite understand. And now we don't have all the facts, but if the only reason you go chase down lovers, well, actually, there's two reasons. Number one, embarrassment and punishment.
Yes. Yes. That's how it feels to me.
Embarrassment and punishment. You want to embarrass your spouse and you want to punish them. Or number two, you want to find money that they spent that you can recoup. But if community property's gone, if everybody's keeping their property separate, then chasing down mistresses can really only have one purpose. The lawyer gets paid and punishment and embarrassment.
Well, and the client will feel good to a
Exactly.
degree. And I think you're probably right, because when you go through a divorce, right, you're kind of stuck on a plane with somebody, or a boat, and it can either, you got two people, it can be a smooth ride if everyone's kind of sitting tight in the upright position with their seatbelts locked, or it can be a really bumpy ride and you can, like, you know drown in the ocean. And it takes two people. It only takes one person to rock the boat in order for it to be a turbulent experience. And a message strategically that they could be trying to send to Dr. Dre is, look, I am going to run your name through the mud. And again, this is all speculative, right? Run your name through the mud. But if you want off this ride, you can just cut me a check and we'll be done tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So,
It's a
um,
strategy. I mean,
not something I
she
would
doesn't have a
advocate,
lot to
but
lose.
yeah, yeah. But does she really? I mean, like, hot take, like, uh, she's going to be just fine. Billy, this is something Billy and I talked about with Jeff Bezos, because we both agree that his wife left money on the table.
Oh yeah.
But my opinion is, okay, what's the difference between, what did she get, like?
We're gonna do a different episode on Bezos, so this part's getting
Okay,
edited out too.
okay, yeah, you didn't like that, all right. Um,
So, all right, so we've talked about the mistresses, we've talked about the prenup. The next issue is the $2 million in monthly support. Darin, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know what their lifestyle is, but I would say that that's a very high number, even if they had a high lifestyle. And I really need to know more about the landscape in California in terms of how they consider things. My understanding is that they have a calculator, which makes it really easy to kind of get a baseline, right? But anytime, and when I say calculator, I mean you plug in things like how long have they been married, what is his income, what is her income, what are maybe certain variable expenses. There's going to be some kind of mechanism for that, which is in Arizona, there's no calculator, and it's uh, almost entirely discretionary, right? The court considers a number of statutory factors, but none of them are really quantitative. So the judge can, in a sense, do what they want. But in California, it's less like that. My understanding is if you put in the numbers, you wouldn't get $2 million per month. And that begs the question, and this is true of child support in Arizona, is you can always, there's always room for a creative attorney to make arguments about why the calculator, which applies to the masses, shouldn't apply in this particular case. And that certainly seems like a situation where it's worth exploring, but $2 million a month seems like a stretch. I think if I were a judge and she were going to win that, she would have to have a lot of definitive proof about how much they were spending per month and the lifestyle that they became accustomed to. And then I might kind of consider her claim. But a starting point, I think, for most judges is what do you need?
Right.
What do you need based on the lifestyle, right? But I think 2 million a month is going to turn a lot of people off, right?
And at this point, both Dr. Dre and Ms. Young have hired accountants. And it looks
Mhm.
like her monthly spend that he was paying was just under $300,000. So it
Yeah.
seems like her cost of living has been roughly $300,000. Although another factor and a separate ask that she has is for private security. Now, what do we know about that?
So like this is like her personal security detail, like so security in terms of like my bodyguards, my teams that keep me safe. So my understanding, she asked for $1.5 million for that as like an advance on her expenses. She wanted him to pay for it. She lost that. She lost her bid because he was in fact paying for her security detail, and she fired them because she didn't like the people that he had hired. So he was willing to hire a team, but he already had a team in place. She fired him. So just said, look, he was paying for it. You fired them. You don't get that. Her counterpoint, and again, this is coming out through the media, not through the legal documents, but her counterpoint in her messaging is, that he's being controlling because he's willing to pay for it, but only if you use my people, and there's privacy concerns.
I
Maybe
bet.
that's true. Maybe it's not true. But I think when you're going for most people, when you're going through a divorce, you got to look at the bigger picture. Um, and she just screwed herself out of a free security detail. So,
Although it may
I
not
mean,
be worth it. I mean, if you've got
yeah,
somebody, I mean, think about that. They're very close to you. And if you are if you're in embroiled in a terrible divorce, the last thing you want is somebody on the other side listening to every word you say, potentially even
yep.
overhearing your conversations with your attorney. So I can understand why she went that way. Now, I think that they settled on a $2 million temporary support number total, so that he is
I
no longer paying her monthly fees and she's got $2 million to do with what she wants.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't know if they couched it as temporary support, but
Okay,
I read it as like a $2 million advance
got it.
to, and maybe we're splitting hairs here, but to keep things in place until they get in front of the judge in April.
Got it.
And
Okay.
yeah, she's going to get some money, obviously, from the divorce. So paying her in advance, like even if the court were to award her $300,000 a month,
Hmm.
you know, on a 24-year marriage,
Hmm.
that's my understanding is in California, um, there's going to be a pretty, I mean, basically an indefinite duration at that point, always subject to modification, of
Hmm.
course, but you know, $300,000 a month is $3.6 million a year. So advancing her 2 million from his, I mean, he's going to spend that at some point, is what I'm saying. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah,
from her perspective, that allows her to spend that money as she wants to, as opposed to having him pay her expenses and therefore see her expenses.
yeah, and I sincerely hope that that she's asking for 2 million a month because she wants to be aggressive, and not because like, but she's not building her lifestyle off of that right now because it's a quick way to go broke.
I don't know how you spend $2 million a month.
Yeah, I don't either, but I don't think she'll get that.
One point that you made earlier that I just want to emphasize is that the rules and the statutes were not written for people that have this type of money.
Hmm.
And so, one mistake that a lot of high income individuals make is thinking they can only get what's in the calculator. And that's simply not true. The calculator is always a guideline that was built for the masses, that was not built for super high income people. And this is something that I think a lot of attorneys miss and a lot of people miss.
Hmm. But 2 million,
But 2 million.
yeah, I mean he is a billionaire, but yeah, if she was really only spending $300,000 per month during the marriage, how on earth would she have a claim for 2 million after the marriage?
I think that was, after they separated, when he was paying her expenses.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that was during the marriage, and I
Okay.
think he's
Okay.
been
Well,
spending lots during the marriage. These past few years, things have been very good to him. Apple stock's been very good to him. So I think that's why she went super aggressive. Now, one of the most interesting issues to me is, the claims and the issue of domestic violence during a marriage and whether or not you can get damages for domestic violence, either in terms of a private civil lawsuit or as part of your spousal maintenance number. Now, Arizona spousal maintenance statute does allow for factoring in domestic violence damages, and anyone can always sue civilly for domestic violence.
right. In Arizona, though, it's based on a criminal conviction, or I think I think it's just criminal conviction, right?
Damages related to a criminal conviction. That's what the Arizona statute says. And to me, that's pretty limited.
Right.
Um,
Because you actually have to have a conviction, which in this case we don't.
right.
Um, so she's really probably looking at, if California, she's probably looking at a civil complaint, right?
Yes. And the other thing is, in Arizona and probably in California as well, you have the ability to join civil complaints with divorces, but it doesn't happen a lot.
Hmm.
And many, many times, people who are victims of domestic violence do not sue for damages. Either it's not financially feasible to do so, or there's another legal impediment. But I think this theory is extremely interesting because if you are the victim of battery, you have damages. If somebody hits you in the face, you're allowed to sue them. You are allowed to get damages. And there's a couple issues that make it very, very difficult for victims of domestic violence inside a marriage to collect money. Number one is damages. Number two is statute of limitations.
Yeah. So statute of limitations is how long after an event occurs that you have to bring a claim. So after a certain period of time, even if everything that you're saying occurred actually happened and there's no factual dispute about that, you may be prohibited from seeking court relief just because of the amount of time that has passed. And that's more of a public policy time. I don't know what the statute of limitations would be in California, but then it becomes not just important what occurred, but also when it occurred.
Right.
And I think from our prior discussions, you had mentioned that she had called the police maybe very early on in their marriage, but that was 24 years ago. So I imagine the statute on that incident has told. Um, from one of the other challenges with domestic violence in general is that the we all know that victims of domestic violence often don't report it to the police. They often stay with they often stay with their abusers because it's a very difficult situation to be in. It's a difficult dynamic. Oftentimes, not only is it physical abuse, but also emotional and financial abuse in terms of like, um, you know, okay, my spouse hit me, but they also pay my bills, and I haven't had a job for 15 years. So it's a very difficult. These are difficult decisions for people to make, and we all know that. But the court gives a lot of deference to whether a police report was filed, whether or not there's medical evidence of the abuse, whether or not somebody tells other people about it. And unfortunately, a lot of those things don't happen, which makes it difficult to prove. Dre is kind of different because I think it's kind of interesting. I would say because um, I don't I don't know if there's a lot of those types of records, but he's also a very public figure, and from what I've heard, he has a certain reputation. So it wouldn't necessarily be surprising.
Right.
Um, and I'm not exactly sure how that would in a case like this, you've got kind of the court of law, and then you also got the court of public opinion,
Right.
and I don't think that would really help him out very much.
Right. There are at least two previous women who have alleged that he was extremely physically abusive. And now you have Nicole coming out and giving very specific instances of abuse, including an allegation that he held a gun to her head. Um, Now, when you have a civil case, you get a jury. And the
Right.
question is, does the jury believe that, who does the jury believe?
Right.
And then how much is that worth? And if you, Dr. Dre, have $1 billion and Nicole is able to show that, or convince a jury that, her version, that she was really tortured and battered throughout a lot of her marriage, how does that affect, will a jury pay her for that? And one very interesting thing that's happening with regards to domestic violence and these claims is goes to the issue of statute of limitations. There's some legislation in some states that say if an act of domestic violence battery occurred within your 2-year limit of statute of limitations, then everything that happened before that gets in. And then there's some other statutes that are proposed that say the statute of limitations on domestic battery begins on the date of the divorce. Now, if that were to happen, it would open up a massive amount of potential litigation, because I think that we watch people get divorced all the time. And
Right.
the way that a marriage breaks down is slowly with repeated events.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true for domestic violence. It's true for any other type of like relationship damage. It doesn't happen. It's not like a one and done thing. Everybody has a different breaking point. Everybody has a different point where they're like, oh, this is the last time they'll go, and you fill in the blank, spend money without my knowledge, cheat on me, call me bad names, hit my kid, whatever it might be. People don't just leave a relationship because they've gotten
Right.
hit, usually.
There's a lot of, it's all very, very, sad and complicated, and a lot of dynamics. And, you know, uh, and the person, when you're representing somebody who's been accused of something, whether it's in a criminal proceeding or, in a divorce proceeding, um, it's very easy. Like there's a playbook you go by, right? You ask, why didn't you call the police? Why did you stay if it was so bad? And part of me always cringes when I have to ask those questions. They're fair questions. You have to do your job, right? But it's not always definitive, right? And you also see that in a lot of sex assault cases too, outside the context of divorce. The
Absolutely.
same types of questions. It is possible for two things to be true at once. It's possible to stay in a shitty marriage for any number of reasons, and you were still abused, whether emotionally, physically, financially, whatever. And that's more of like a human analysis, but the playbook is very um, very, very standard and straightforward on the defense side of it, right? I think the thing, and it's one of these interesting things where there are, I think, I think there are a lot of people that are abused or have been abused that have been silent,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so that statute or that change in the rules would allow those people an opportunity to speak. I think there are a much smaller number of people that will absolutely take advantage of that for the wrong reasons. And I know that I'm sure we've all experienced cases as attorneys where the other side is lying and making stuff up, or we're about as confident in that as we can be. So there are going, and I think it's interesting because I think we tend to focus on when we have these discussions um, the potential for people to abuse those systems. Because I guarantee you, if they change that law, we'll get an increase in those types of claims, which is um, and there will be people that lie about it. But I mean, what is it you think that makes us focus on that rather than all the people that now have an opportunity?
I
Uh,
mean, you're bringing a great point, and this is so relevant because we've watched what just happened with the Me Too movement, and it
yeah,
was just a cultural shift. For years, women had been saying that there were people like Epstein or Weinstein or, name the powerful man, Matt Lauer. Like these people had been accused for years and years and years, but there was a cultural shift that said, wait a minute, we don't think this is okay. And yes, it is possible that people come forward with false allegations, but that's why we have a criminal system
Yeah.
or a civil system. That's why we have juries. That's why we have lawyers that get to present evidence. And I think that um, we are headed to a time when people will recognize that there is a line, even within a marriage, where you've crossed it and you've done criminal acts and you should be held responsible. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think we have to make a decision as a society. Would we rather open the door for more people to come, make it easier for victims to come forward at the potential risk of making a few small, a very small number of bad actors, giving them an additional opportunity to take advantage of the system, or would we rather keep the system closed in order to prevent, you know, a small number of bad actors. And I think we want to live in a society where there's um, more opportunity for victims to come forward. You know.
And it does change behavior. When people, there is a deterrent effect right now happening against sexual harassment in the workplaces
Yeah.
because liability changes behavior. And so the whole movement of making it harder to sue is I think really backwards because it's not easy to sue. You and I know this. Coming
Yeah.
up with the money to put together a lawsuit and the time and the evidence, it's not easy at all. But it really does change, especially institutional behavior. When I, as an employer, face potential liability for allowing people within my organization to be abusive or allowing an environment of sexual harassment, employers start changing their tune real fast. And that's a good thing. It makes society better.
Yeah, and I think that's why we've seen an increase in, people haven't been getting what they need from the legal system to a degree. So they get on Twitter, they get
Hmm.
on, social media because, um, you know, um, whether or not you can win a case in court, you can really take, have keep people accountable in the court of public opinion, so to speak.
It is real interesting, isn't it? The consequences that happen now and the ability to like for people to state their claim is just it's insane. So we've gotten off topic on Dr. Dre, but
Well,
I think these are important topics and big cases highlight these types of things. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about what happens to Dr. Dre and Ms. Young. One thing we didn't hit on is his aneurysm. I think you did mention that he had an aneurysm, but he is now out of the hospital and I think doing better. And of course, we wish him health and wellness.
yep. I was also gonna say that shoot, cut. Um, one of the things that is difficult with domestic violence too is it's difficult for victims to relive their experiences, which is necessary in order to prove a claim. And I don't know how we get around that from a legal perspective, because you have a constitutional right to due process with these types of things. But it is in practice very, very difficult to, and it can re-traumatize people. I know we're off topic, but I also think it's on.
It's
I'm
important. This
Yeah,
idea that people are sue happy is wrong.
yeah. I think, and the other thing too, relevant to the Dre situation, is you know how are her claims more or less credible? Um, and this is a question. I'd like to get your opinion because I think we may have to cut this. Maybe controversial, right? But are her claims more or less credible because she's asking for $2 million a month? Right? And
Good
should that
question.
have any impact on it?
Good
Right?
question.
Because I think for most people, it's easier to push it to the side and believe maybe she's just making stuff up or overstating stuff because she's being so aggressive. But if it's all true, maybe that's part of why she's reacting the way that she is from a strategic and spousal maintenance standpoint.
I'm really glad you brought this up
Yeah.
because if I were Nicole's attorney and and I was coming up with how much to ask for and why, if I'm being very aggressive in a claim for spousal maintenance, I want to have a reason. And if the reason isn't justified with expenses, then there are other reasons why you can justify a higher than normal spousal maintenance ask. And so if I were representing Nicole and I knew, and Nicole was talking to me and she was saying, that I was put through years of trauma, I would want to talk to her psychologist. I would want to see the medical records. I would want to see, like, how can we quantify the damage and the treatment you're going to need and the hit to your earning capacity because of the abuse that you have suffered. And that is what I would use to justify a higher than normal ask. And maybe 2 million wouldn't be the number, but I want to have an analysis that goes into the number that I'm asking for, that it can be tied back to something concrete.
Right. And I think you make a great point. And part of this is probably because we're hearing all this information through diluted channels in the grapevine, so to speak. But like,
Hold on one sec.
that's a very interesting point. And I just forgot what I was going to say.
One.
That's a really good point, because I think that a lot of, we're getting all this information through the grapevine, kind of through diluted channels. And so one of the reasons why maybe the $2 million per month feels arbitrary or maybe aggressive is because her people to date haven't done a real good job of explaining the foundation for that. And if you're going to ask for a large number like that, you got to have a good reason. And I'm not seeing any of that in the articles. And to be fair, sometimes you got to get stuff, filed. But again, these are people that have millions of dollars to spend money on attorney's fees. And if they already have experts, they should have some, I would feel like you have to be able to prove the number. If it's just, you can't just ask for 2 million because he has 800 billion. You got to tie it to your expenses. And I don't think her team's done a good job of laying that out so far. But maybe they will. I mean, it's certainly plausible that she could have that based on what they were spending. But I mean, $800 million goes pretty quickly if you're spending $2 million a month.
It does. It does. And
Yeah.
she was an attorney. Now she's not working. Like, there's ways that you can increase and justify a spousal maintenance claim when the other person can afford it, that goes beyond your expenses. But you need to get creative, and you need to
Yeah.
get some oomph behind you in terms of experts or calculations or theories.
Right. Right. And I would just like to say, I'm pretty sure she's probably going to make way more in spousal than she ever did or would or could as an attorney. I mean,
True.
I'm still young in my career, but I don't particularly feel bad for her.
300,000 a month. I know. We're
Yeah,
talking about a
yeah,
different world.
crazy,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was why, and that's not a commentary on their marriage. And if she did go through abuse, I certainly feel empathy for that. But financially, she's going to be okay.
Yes. Well, Darin, thank you so much. This has been a really fun, different episode of the Modern Divorce Podcast. And there are a lot more celebrity divorces that you and I need to talk about. So we will schedule it and we will get it done here pretty soon.
Yep. And I will only talk about Jeff Bezos during the Jeff Bezos episode.
Deal.
All right?
Bye.
Bye.